Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. I am joined tonight with Drew. Owen is on his way home from football practice. He should be joining us shortly. We are going to be diving into the Titans and the Texans schemes and draft class. But before we do that, we need to welcome Drew back to the channel. Drew, it's been about 2 months since we've seen each other. How is your summer going?
It's been going great. Very, very busy. It's been too long. I hated being gone this long, but we're finally back. Good note to start back on, talking some Titans. That I can do. So I'm glad to be back. Hopefully it will not be as long before I'm on here next.
Yeah, so I think Drew and I were talking backstage for a while. I believe Drew and Parker will be on their Tuesday night schedule sometime in August. But right now we've got a one-off show. We are breaking down every Wednesday. We break down the schemes of 2 AFC teams. Today happens to be Titans. Drew saw it on the schedule. He said, hey, I'll do that podcast with you. And it works out really well because Josh can't be here and Owen is stuck at football practice. So, Drew, how would you describe the Titans' offensive scheme from a running the ball standpoint?
Yeah, so I think the scheme from an offensive standpoint, running the ball less so than their passing scheme, but it's hard to evaluate this past year on a lot of fronts because kind of starting this off, and this goes for everything we're talking about tonight, they're a difficult team to judge just because, to be candid, I mean, they were pretty comfortably a bottom 3 roster talent-wise in the NFL, and I think that reflected a lot in the scheme where it was a lot of Band-Aid fixes where you had to I think it was pretty clear both, Callahan and Denard Wilson had to adjust on both sides of the scheme to kind of cover up a lot of the weaknesses in the roster. It was hard to get a pure view at what they wanted to do scheme-wise overall, but there were definitely glimpses. And the run game was definitely more pure because that was clearly the strength of the team as well, too, with Tony Pollard being kind of the most successful guy on the roster last year in their individual roles. It is a fun dichotomy, too, because during the Henry era, pre-Callahan, Tennessee was one of the most outside zone heavy teams in recent memory, maybe of all time. It was, you were seeing 70-80% outside zone with Derrick Henry because that was their bread and butter. And then it was an immediate flip once you brought in Brian. But I think, honestly, it was probably more Bill Callahan's influence than it was Brian. I think a lot of the run game schematics go to Bill instead of Brian. I think because you've seen everywhere Bill Callahan has been, there's a consistent theme of being a very gap-heavy team. You run a lot of power and a lot of counter. Those are your bread and butter for a Bill Callahan-coached offensive line. And I think because he's kind of the legendary offensive line coach that he is, he gets final say on the run game is what it appears. And that's exactly what happened in Tennessee, is you saw a flip from a very zone heavy team in their run scheme, flip completely to a more gap-heavy scheme, and they ran just a ton of power and counter. And that was where you saw there was a lot of growing pains the first 6 weeks of the season, but you really hit your stride. I think Tony Pollard was a great guy to have that first year in shifting a run scheme like that. But yeah, they were extremely heavy in gap stuff and specifically power and counter this past year.
Cool. And then how would you describe their passing scheme?
Yeah, the passing scheme is where it gets a lot more muddied, I think, because of the talent level, specifically because of the struggles you had at quarterback last year, where I think there's a very, very big difference between what Callahan was running in Cincinnati versus what he ran in Tennessee last year. And I think what he ran in Cincinnati is more what he wants to run, and last year was more of a causality of what you had under center and kind of the limitations of what you had under center. In Callahan's ideal scheme, I think you're seeing a lot of what we see Joe Burrow do so well. Is you've got everything is typically intermediate level passing concepts. Everything is timing and rhythm based. You got a lot of snappy timing based throws, and it requires it's a lot of mental strain on a quarterback. It's very reliant on a quarterback's post snap processing ability, and I think that's where you saw the disconnect between Will Levis and Callahan last year. Is that was pretty easily Will Levis's biggest issue or his biggest hang up is post snap processing. So I think that's where Callahan wanted to operate. But instead you saw a lot of, slow, heavy max protect play action type concepts where everything was deep shots you had to manufacture. Again, because Will Levis, you can't really expect him to work through a full, complex progression, or you couldn't last year. So I think what we saw last year was again more of a reflection of the talent level of the general roster, especially under center. But I think in an ideal world, Callahan wants much more of what you saw in Cincinnati, that intermediate, rhythm-based, timing-based passing system.
Cool. So I'm looking for a table. It's amazing how everybody wants to write an article about who the draft picks were. I just want a list.
Oh yeah.
So I'm looking. Wow, I still haven't found it after like 8 clicks in. So obviously the Titans took Cam Ward first overall. How do you see Cam Ward changing the passing scheme?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because I've always preached you mold the scheme to the player, not the player to the scheme, which is kind of something you heard Callahan and the whole front office say verbatim during the draft process when it got more and more clear they were leaning towards Cam Ward. And I think, again, funny enough, there were so many similarities between Miami's offensive scheme in 2024 and what Callahan wants to run. Like there were you were just dead, like so much parallel between their passing concepts. It was dead on. So I think it's going to be a very, very smooth transition for Cam because he's going to be running a lot of the same, pro style concepts that he's running in Miami. But I do think, Cam Ward's a guy that has thrived. I mean, he mentioned that he wants to run deep choice in his introductory press conference in Tennessee. So I think there's going to be a lot of that intermediate stuff that Callahan wants to run, but he's going to have to add in some more aggressive deep shot, gambler style things. That's Cam Ward's game. That's what Cam Ward wants to run. That's where he lives. So I think you're going to see on a general basis, it's going to be more of what I described earlier, that snappy, rhythm-based, timing-based stuff on the intermediate level, but you will see a pretty good amount of aggressive deep shots too, because that's just kind of what Cam would want to bring into that offense.
Okay, so building on that, how do you see Shamir Dyke, Alec Eilmanor, and then undrafted free agent Xavier Restrepo fitting into the passing scheme that you described? Do you think all 3 players are that exact scheme that you described, or do you think, based on your assessment of those receivers during the draft cycle, do they fit, do you think?
I definitely think Eilmanor and DK both fit extremely well, and you're gonna see it's gonna be rare to see day 3 receivers like them get the level of starting caliber reps they're gonna get. Like their rep counts are gonna be high for day 3 rookies. I think they both fit really, really well. Restrepo is the one that I have a little bit more of a hang up on, just simply because I think Tyler Lockett is going to be a guy that fits a lot more of the slot stuff they're going to be asking for. And I think a lot of it is based in the athletic limitations that Restrepo has. I would expect him to make the team, but I don't know that we see him see the field a whole lot as a rookie. But I think Eilmanor is the first true prototypical X type receiver Tennessee's had in a couple of years. And I think he's a guy that really excels at that intermediate separation. That was kind of his game, even as a bigger guy. I think he's going to thrive there as an X. I would expect him to be a day 1 starter, to be honest. DK, he's a little bit less versatile. He's not really a 3-down guy. But as far as a rotational Z and a pure field stretching deep threat goes, I think DK is almost as good as you could ask for that point in the draft. And I think when they do want to add in those sprinkled in deep shots and manufactured deep passing concepts, DK is going to be a guy that really, really excels at that, because that's basically all he did at Florida, because that was all they let him do. I mean, you're going to see that early 4.3 speed pop up. I think he's an awesome deep threat, and he's really going to kind of shine as a rotational field stretcher when they do bring in those kind of deep concepts into that offense.
And then I lost my page there. Okay, and then offensive lineman Jackson Slater. You would describe the shift maybe more to a power running game.
I think it's yes and no. I think that is probably where they want their identity. But at the same time, ironically, I think that pick comes from having a lack of offensive linemen who can really work in space. I think that was what Slater did best. So while there is a lot of in between tackle stuff, and they want power to be a big part of their identity. They also just had a pretty glaring lack of linemen who were athletic enough to work in space and work at second level. And I think that was what Slater did certainly best and probably better than most of the linemen we saw go on day 3. So I think that's certainly the part in the run scheme that drove that pick most. So yeah, I think they were just purely looking for a lineman who could work in space and work as a puller and kind of survive at the second level more than what they had last year.
You project Slater as a week 1 starter?
No, I don't think he's going to end up being that. I do think he's probably more of their long-term plan at center because Lloyd Cushenberry's health is is very, very questionable right now. He's probably going to start on the PUP list. So it'll probably be Corey Levin at first. It feels crazy to say about a 5th-round pick. I don't think he would, not necessarily a good starter, but I think he would survive if you tossed him in week 1 at center. I don't think it would be catastrophic. But I think he's more of a plan for the future, more of a stash and develop type guy. They're going to expect to come in as your year 2, year 3 center rather than right away. But he's probably the first guy up if somebody goes down, just purely because the offensive line depth is so thin right now.
Okay. So let's pivot to the Titans defense. How would you describe the Titans defensive scheme?
So, I mean, again, that's another one where it's kind of hard to it would be hard to ask any defensive coordinator to run their ideal scheme with the personnel the Titans were dealing with last year, because you've got pretty comfortably the worst pass rushing unit as far as edge talent goes in the entire league. Jeffrey Simmons is obviously still one of the better interior guys, but there were health problems there. So that limits a lot of what you can do. They were very cover 3 heavy. And again, like they had so many health issues in the secondary that while you look, service level, the secondary talent wise is pretty good. But once Snead went down for the year, and you had other guys struggle week to week, you ended up with Darrell Baker as your one of your starting boundary guys, and it all just kind of goes downhill pretty quickly as far as you're again, like I said at the beginning, Band-Aid type scheme stuff where you're more having to do stuff to cover up talent holes rather than run what your ideal scheme would be. So again, they ran a lot of cover 3. I think a lot of it is just dependent on the fact that they have virtually no pass rush injection from the edge right now. But I mean, cover 3 was kind of their bread and butter as far as just a general schematic goes last year.
So then how would your draft evaluation of specifically Kevin Winston and Marcus Harris relative to playing in a cover 3 scheme, Drew?
So Kevin Winston, it's funny because I think he did everything at such a high level except for kind of when he was asked to play in that deep center role when he wasn't asked to very often in Penn State's defense. But when he was, I thought he would get too shallow and kind of get stuck watching the QB sometimes. But I think he's probably, as soon as he's healthy, he's probably your immediate box safety. I think is an immediate starter there. I think he fits in. He's better than Xavier Woods or Mike Brown, regardless of what scheme you're running, just from a pure talent perspective. So I think he's going to come in there. He was more of just a value pick rather than I think anything that matched their scheme identity, just because that knee injury made him fall probably 30, 40 picks further than he should have. But as far as Marcus Harris goes too, I think that was the first year regime, Borgonzi, it was pretty clear they wanted their identity in this draft to be projection and traits and ceiling based. I think Marcus Harris is another reflection of that, where he's a guy that's pretty unrefined in coverage to me, but I think he's a really good athlete. I think he strikes me more as a nickel. And I think, again, that's kind of in similar vein to what I said with Jackson Slater, is that's more of a plan for the future at nickel corner, when I don't expect them to re-sign Roger McCreary. And I think that's kind of a stash and develop plan with Marcus Harris, where you expect him to come over and take that apex nickel role over from him. And kind of fit more that Denard Wilson mold of DB, where you just have somebody that's really physical and really, really, really athletic, like a Jarvis Brownlee, what we saw last year too with him. I think Marcus Harris just fits that kind of junkyard dog mentality they want in their DBs.
All in-house football practice.
It was good. First practice of like the actual true season today. So we ran a little late having to do a coaches meeting afterwards. So apologies for jumping out a little later than normal.
Well, and we adjust, right? It's next man up. Drew's here. Like, we got you. How would you describe the Titans' defensive scheme, Owen?
Yeah, so their defensive coordinator, Denard Wilson, came from being a Ravens defensive backs coach back in 2023. And you see a lot of those kind of reflections in what they run based on what the Ravens have historically run under Jim Harbaugh, especially like how Drew was talking about with cover three, some more multiple looking fronts. You even look at like what their fronts are going to be constructed like and who they drafted to fill that with Olufemi Odejo. And then you have Draymond Jones, kind of this bigger Kyle Van Noy-esque outside linebacker option. He can play anywhere from the 3-tech to the outside in space. You have a ton of things that reflect what they're looking to do based on what the Ravens typically do with their defense, or what they did do while Wilson was there on their defense. And he also has experience working with some different safeties of different body types, like when he was working with the Jets as their DB coach. He had Jamal Adams there. Makes me really excited for Kevin Winston Jr., for him to be able to have a guy who worked with those similar types of players, where bigger body, can fly around, can be used in multiple looks, whether it's closer to the line of scrimmage or as a deeper post safety. So there's a lot of stuff there that their coordinator specifically has brought from different steps along his career path. But I think when looking at schematically, you're going to see a lot of similarities to what the Ravens have been and are going to continue to run at this point in their cycle.
And Drew, I didn't have a chance to ask, what was your draft assessment of Oyedejo, and how do you think he fits into the Titans front?
Yeah, that one is honestly one of the more puzzling picks to me for where they are as a team, not necessarily schematically. I mean, he was like a guy that we saw continuously rise throughout the whole process, just kind of skyrocket up boards. I kind of fell on him as like an early third round guy. So not a massive reach by any means where they took him. And I think, again, that just more reflects the kind of traits and projection mindset that the new front office is bringing. And I think he's going to be a guy that like, if you ask fans this time next year about Oyedejo, I think they're going to hate him and say he's a bust. And if you ask him 2 to 3 years from now, I think they're going to be really fond of the pick and think it was a great pick. Because I think because of the lack of talent in their edge room, he's going to get thrust into a starting role. He's going to be their immediate 2 or 3 behind Draymond Jones and Arden Key right off the bat. And he's just like, this guy's been playing he's been a full-time edge rusher for 8 games in his career. Like, he's not ready to do that, to handle that level of reps yet. But he's going to have to, because the edge talent is so thin right now. But I think, down the road, and this guy gets more time to actually develop more as a true edge rusher and a pass rusher. And he's already a great run defender with the background as an inside linebacker. I think he's going to be a guy that fits what they want in their edges really well. You can tell behind the scenes too, like the energy level that he brings. He's one of the guys that I've heard get the most glowing reviews from a personality standpoint everywhere he's been. That was another theme of this draft class, where they wanted guys that love football, because they've had issues with that in the past draft classes under the previous regime, with guys that just didn't love football. So they kind of overcorrected with that from a mentality standpoint in this. So I think the Oyedejo pick was just as much about his mindset and his personality as a player as it is on the field. But yeah, I think 2 to 3 years down the road, he's going to be a guy that you look at as a solid pick and somebody that's pretty integral to their scheme for defensive front.
So I have a question I'll ask both of you, but I'll start with Owen. Oyedejo, designated pass rusher or 3-down edge? Owen?
So I was a massive fan of Oyedejo coming out of UCLA. He's one of the guys I was advocating for the Bills draft with their higher second round pick. I had a mid-second on him, and I felt like his transition from middle linebacker to edge, you can see he had some stronger run defense instincts. And even though he played pass rusher for like maybe 9 games in his career at that point, he had some flashes of pass rusher upside already. So I thought he could be a 3-down edge this year. But I want to offer a third option to your question here, Jim. Is he more likely to be a pass rush specialist, 3rd-down backer, or one of their starting inside linebackers this year? Just because they've brought in Lorenzo Carter, they have Arden Key, they have Draymond Jones. Like, with how poorly I viewed the inside linebacker depth for this team this year, I'm thinking if there's a way that they just want to get him on the field, they could have him be more of an early down run defender in the middle linebacker room, and then potentially move him over to more of a pass rushing role as an outside linebacker if they really like him better than, say, like maybe a Draymond Jones, or they take a Devondre Sweat or Sebastian Joseph Day off the field, move Jones more toward down lineman position and shift Oyedejo over to be more of a pass rushing outside linebacker. Like, they can be more multiple with that. And while I do think Oladejo's future or his upside is at edge in the NFL, I do think with having that safety net of him having played middle linebacker, that may be a pathway for him to get on the field earlier than what most people would see from him, like you were talking about, like as a third down pass rusher, maybe, than what some people might have projected so far.
So, Drew, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think I could see that on a team that didn't have the desperately bad edge situation that Tennessee does right now. I think obviously Cody Barton's going to be the main guy on the interior. They really like what they've gotten out of James Williams. I was a huge fan of James Williams. His like last 4 games of tape he put at the end of last season. Like he didn't get to take a snap on defense till week 15, but the 3 games he did get to put on tape, I thought he was very, already a starting caliber run fitter as an inside linebacker at Tennessee. So I expect him to pretty comfortably be the 2. And I think that honestly, like within the first few weeks, you probably see Femi get pushed into that 3-down edge spot because rather than him being ready for that, it's just purely because Arden Key is borderline unplayable as a run defender. Like he's a guy that has to be DPR for you. So I think that with Femi's strength and his floor kind of already being in the run defense side of things because he has the background at inside linebacker, I would expect him to be more of the 3-down guy and then try to push Arden Key more back into that DPR role that he played in Jacksonville and has played most of his career.
So I think Arden Key, it's either Jake Robertson was saying we have to draft an edge because Arden Key's there, or I've heard Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs call out Arden Key. I don't remember which podcast it was, but one of them was calling him out.
See, Arden Key, it's a lot like what Nick Westbrook-Akine got when he was playing receiver there, where it's like these guys are really good at what they do, but Tennessee has been asking them to do things that are way outside of their skill range because the talent level on the roster has been so bad. Like Nick Westbrook-Akine has a great, wide receiver, borderline wide receiver 3 to 4. But when you're asking him to be your wide receiver 2 week in, week out, he's not going to shine in that role. Same thing with Arden Key. Arden Key was great as a rotational DPR. He should be your 3 to 4 in an ideal edge rotation. That's what he was for most of his time in Jacksonville and throughout his NFL career. And then you get in Tennessee with their edge situation, and he's immediately thrust in as a full-time 3-down edge, as a 5-tech, 7-tech wide 9 sometimes. And it's not going to look good because he's never been a run defender in his career, and Tennessee is making him do that because of the lack of edge talent and edge depth.
Okay. So any other comments like, and you came in after we had already done the Titans offense. Do you want to like throw in what your evaluations were on Ward or Chimere Dike? Is it Dike or DK?
I think it's Chimere DK is the right way to
DK. I'm sorry.
That.
So
No, that was
DK, Alec Manor, Gunnar Helm, or Jackson Slater on the offensive side.
Yeah, I had it on in my car as I was driving in, so I heard what you guys were mentioning, so I won't rehash too much of it. I actually do want to talk on Kim Ward for a second because for me, I was a big Will Levis supporter when he was coming out of Penn State or Kentucky. Sorry, he went to Penn State originally, transferred to Kentucky, and I felt like you guys kind of hit on the head where the offensive system was not conducive to succeed with Will Levis as their quarterback. There is an offensive system out there, and that's why I have confidence that if he went and became a quarterback that was able to sit behind in an offensive system that utilized him better to his strengths, he could be one of those Sam Darnold, Geno Smith type stories where he's able to capitalize on some of those talents if you support him well enough and unlock more of that stuff. But this was just not that offense for him last year. And while I do think Cam Ward is a little bit more well-suited because Miami ran some more of those concepts that you'd like to see there, I am still a little worried about how this offensive scheme is going to translate with Ward coming over because Ward, while he did play in a system that allowed him to have some of those similar recognizable route combinations, I do think that his best talent came from pushing the ball down the field, extending plays, being a little more off script, and at times not having to be fully on the ball when it came to reading defenses and playing in structure and on time. He excelled a lot of working in the play action rollout, having a one read, a run, being able to extend plays, stuff like that. So, and that's kind of similar to what Levis was known as being good for coming out of Kentucky. So for me, I think Ward is a bit better off than Levis when it comes to those things, but I'm not super confident that he's going to not run into some of the same issues that Levis ended up having to do, and the scheme is going to have to take a slight detour in what the coach really wants to, Callahan wants to really push for, which alarms me a bit. I am a bit encouraged, though, by the receiver talent. I think they do have some better talent there. Like you were talking about, Nick Westbrook-Kine was their number 2 receiver last year, and that they have to make a pivot and start playing different styles of offense to more benefit their quarterbacks, whoever's playing at that point. I do think that you can make that transition a bit better because you have different play styles, like between Van Jefferson, Calvin Ridley, Jamari DK, Eli Guymander, who I thought was criminally underdrafted, and then even Xavier Streppel as a slot option that's different than Tyler Lockett as a slot option. You have so many different body types and abilities and skill talents that you can make some on-the-fly adjustments to benefit Cam Ward, and it'd be a bit better when it comes to what they were able to do as opposed to what they did last year with Will Levis. So I don't think it's the exact same situation, but I do have my pauses on how it's going to work out, despite me liking the individual players they drafted, each person.
Okay. So any other comments on the Titans, or can we shift to the Texans?
I think want to touch on. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say is that I think this team needs to be the one that's going to be trolling post camp cuts or making those savvy trades of flipping someone who's going to get cut off their roster, or like a late round pick for a guy who's going to get cut off someone else's roster and hit waivers to supply talent to depth at the middle linebacker or their edge room or even at corner at times. I do think this is going to be a team that needs to really troll some of the waters of those better, deeper teams and get some players that are going to be unable to make rosters, but are a little bit too good to make it to practice squad. So I think they're going to be a big player in that if I had to be predictive.
Drew, what were you going to add?
I wanted to hit quickly on Gunnar Helm because I didn't touch on that pick. And I think schematically, he's probably one of the more interesting, if not the most interesting pick. It's the one I've struggled with the most from a philosophical perspective. Because I think through the pre-draft process, we kind of talked about Gunnar Helm the whole time as this like inline wide tight end. We talked about him much as a blocker, like kind of your more traditional inline guy. And I don't think that's what Gunnar Helm is. I think he really, really struggles as an inline blocker. I think to his credit, I think we saw like the last 3 to 4 games of the season were definitely his best blocking performances. So there's a clear linear development there. But on a general basis, I would not expect him to be traditional Y and a guy that can survive full-time in line. I think he's going to play much more of that, F move tight end role that Okonkwo has played. And I think I would expect them to kind of phase Okonkwo out a little bit in favor of Helm early on in the season, because I think it's pretty clear that Callahan, what he wants to prioritize in his tight ends, he has shown a complete disregard for an inline Y blocker and is clearly prioritizing guys that work after the catch. That's what he wants from his tight ends in his scheme. And I think that's why they went after a guy like Helm. I think that was probably the highlight of Helm's scouting profile to me, at least. That was my favorite part of his game. So I think the drafting of Gunnar Helm, I think it shows a clear, plan for what they want to do with Okonkwo, which is let him go after this year. And I don't think they see him as a particularly big part of the offense. And I would expect to see Helm take over more that number 1 F tight end role relatively early into the season, maybe halfway through. I would expect him to take over as the number 1 guy within his rookie year.
Okay. So my bold prediction for the Titans is that they're going to win the division and make the playoffs. Right. Like, I'm not high on Anthony Richardson with the Colts. I think the Colts have a good roster minus the quarterback. I'm not sold on Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. And we're about to cover the Texans, and I think there's going to be a reversion to the mean. But, Owen, what would be your description of the Texans' offensive scheme?
Yeah, so they made a big change this past season when it came to their offensive play caller. Bobby Slowick went from C.J. Stroud's rookie season as being like one of these potential head coaching candidates to someone who's now out of a job and is the passing game coordinator for the Miami Dolphins. So we're going to see a big change when it comes to what they're going to be running, specifically as it caters more towards what C.J. Stroud likes to do. Because they got away from it a little bit, and you could tell that So for me, I wasn't the biggest fan of how their passing game was being run specifically through CJ Stroud. I felt like his rookie year, while it was really good, he got a lot of turnover luck, and you saw the regression back to the mean a bit this year when it came to getting some of that turnover luck back and having the offensive line not really keep up around him, and his play beginning to look more like that of a younger quarterback on a team that's still building up its prospects. So with the players they've added and the kind of compliments they went towards through the draft of free agency, my best guess is they're going to go and look at being more of a spread it out kind of offense and have some more multiple looking fronts with the receivers. They have Jaden Higgins who's 6'4", but runs crisp routes, can be more of a separator on the outside. Nico Collins, who's another big body outside threat type player. Christian Kirk, Jalen Noel as two very different types of slot receiver bodies. John Mechie, Tank Dell whenever he comes back. Like, they've added players there that give them more multiple fronts, and they're going to be more so of a spread zone running and allowing CJ Stroud to work some more intermediate throws and some of the stuff that he felt more comfortable running at Ohio State, as opposed to what they were kind of going through with Bobby Slowick, where it was a lot more fullback inclusion, bigger personnel with the tight ends. Dalton Schultz was heavily in the passing game last year, and you could see a lot of that was not really meshing well with CJ. And like I said, he reverted back to the mean because of that. So I do think they're going to air it out a bit more and create more space, manufactured space, which is what you saw with their investments as well.
So, Drew, how about you? I know that you didn't you were coming on for the Titans, so the Texans might be a little bit outside of the wheelhouse, but how would you describe the Titans' offense from where you sit?
Yeah, obviously I'm not quite as in tune with Houston's schemes. I am Tennessee, still being in the same division. I have a general idea. I think Owen nailed it on a general basis, and I think again this is where you see what I was talking about earlier, where your personnel kind of drives a lot of your scheme decisions. For a team that has comfortably one of the most talented receiver units in the league, and a team that's kind of shown a complete disregard for their offensive line situation, for a team that had one of the more brutal offensive line situations last year, and then continued to make it worse over the offseason. That's going to be your path to success, is to get in those empty sets, spread it out, spread defenses out, and get things wide, and make those quick decisions. Take some of the pressure off your offensive line and put it more on the mental strain on CJ Stroud. And I think he can handle it. I think Stroud's one of the better guys in this league from a mental processing standpoint. And obviously, like we just mentioned, they have the receiving talent to handle that level of scheme, or that type of scheme. So yeah, I think exactly what Owen said. We're spreading it out and getting in those quick empty sets, and kind of centering your offense around that kind of air attack is going to be the way they kind of handle their personnel limitations this year.
And just to add some depth to that, because I knew I had Bobby Slowick pulled up, forgetting that he got fired. So I pulled up Nick Caley. His previous stops as a coach, immediately outside of college, he was at New England from 2015 to 2022, working different positions, whether it was offensive assistant, tight ends coach, fullbacks coach. So he has some implements in some of those bigger settings and bigger personnel typings, especially with being at that in the later stages of the Tom Brady Patriots, as well as working with a team that likes to run that when Belichick was there. But then also he was the tight ends coach and passing coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams last season, and that's where he got this opportunity to be the offensive coordinator for the Texans. And I don't think, looking back at the Rams passing game last year, you would or their marriage of the pass to the run as well, you didn't see an obvious case of them going towards more heavier systems than you would have seen any other year the Rams were running the offense. Now, again, Sean McVay's the play caller there and establishes what the offense is going to do. But I think I would envision that that's going to be more so what they're going to lean towards offensively. I do think they're still going to have some more power rushing elements because they do have fullbacks, they do have multiple tight ends in the roster. They have Caley coming from that Patriots background, but at the same time, the Patriots utilize a lot of slot receivers with options, allowing their quarterback to use his intelligence to attack zone coverages and make decisions for them on the field, and let them really go out there and play, not just strict play formats. So I think that's what they're going to look to pull from between his stops in New England as a player who worked in that passing game, as well as being the passing game coordinator of the Rams last year. So while I do think, as an offensive coordinator, you may see some more power rushing stuff with Joe Mixon and now Nick Chubb being added. You have some more bigger bodies that can carry that kind of load, you're still going to see some more space and slot receiver-oriented passing game concepts.
Okay. Let's dive into the Texans' offensive line for a little bit. So Laramie Tunsil was traded. I believe that was an off-season trade, right? That was not trade deadline. That was off-season. I guess in July that all bleeds together. Did that happen in November or did it happen in March?
I know. It happened like March-ish time, I think.
Yeah. So they've signed Cam Robinson. They've signed Laken Tomlinson. And they drafted Ariante Ursery. So, Drew, what was your assessment of Ariante Ursery?
Yes, I was one of the people. I liked him. I was a little bit lower on him than consensus, but not like dramatically by any means. I still liked him. I saw him more as a guy that I thought like could stay on the outside if you really needed him to, but I think his future is probably more successful at guard. He was extremely powerful. Obviously, one of the best punches in that whole draft class. I thought he was a little bit limited athletically and like foot speed wise. That's why I kind of liked him more on the interior. I do really worry about him he looks to be a guy they expect to be an early starter, maybe not day one, but it's probably sometime in year one. And that really worries me because I think he's a guy that's got a lot of technical refinement to go before he's ready to take on an NFL role immediately. So I think of all the tackles, and also I know the Titans met with him and weren't particularly impressed with his mental state as a player either. So or maturity level, I should say. So if they're a guy, if they're expecting him to be a guy to start kind of remedy some of those offensive line problems, especially on the outside, as an offensive tackle early on in his career, I think that's probably going to end relatively poorly because, again, I think he's just a guy that's got a lot of technical refinement to go before he's ready for that. But the ceiling is high with him. I do see the projection and end goal with him. I think the ceiling is high.
So, Owen, how about you? How do you see Ariante Ursery and the other offensive line acquisitions in Houston?
So I'm a bit confused as to what – like they added a ton of bodies. Like they added guys who have started games in the league. They have Cam Robinson, projected left tackle, Laken Tomlinson, projected left guard. And then their right side, including their pivot center, are all going to be guys who are returning between Jared Patterson, Titus Howard, and Blake Fisher. I think Titus Howard's the only one I'm like genuinely confident in being like a quality starter for them. Everyone else is kind of a question mark, especially like Blake Fisher at right tackle. And then behind those three guys, they brought in Jake Andrews from New England, who was a good player when healthy. It's just going to be the when healthy part. Like he's going to be able to come in and take that center job. He's going to be one of the other guards, or going to be the other guard opposite Titus Howard. We'll see what they can actually get out of Jake Andrews after adding him to free agency. Ed Ingram, once upon a time, a favorite of mine from LSU when he was coming out of the draft. Now, after a few years in Minnesota, it hasn't worked. And I don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to be able to come in here, play alongside some other question marks in offensive line and make it magically work. And then they brought in Trent Brown as a backup, again, another former Patriots player that their offensive coordinator will be familiar with. I don't think you can really get a lot out of him at this point in his career. So for me, Ursery is the one player that they brought in that I'm like excited to see how he fits in. And that's coming from someone who didn't love Ursery as a prospect. Like he has size and a punch and he can move a little bit. I think I agree. I think his movement would be better, more of a plus if he was a guard on a tackle, but I do think he has the length and size to play tackle with some heavy hands. But he does have a ton of technical issues, and for someone who started as many games as he did in Minnesota and still have technical issues, I'm not sure how much better you can really anticipate him getting now that the game is speeding up, being faster, and he has to learn on the fly in the NFL, especially if he's the one who's going to be pushing Blake Fisher for that starting job at right tackle. So, again, outside of Titus Howard and maybe Laken Tomlinson, I'm not super sold on any of the options they have currently starting or, pushing the starters for playing time. I really don't see how this isn't one of the worst offensive lines in the league, despite the many additions they did make this season.
Drew, anything to add to that?
No, just kind of emphasizing everything Owen said. I think, exactly where you're expecting Ursery to compete for that right tackle spot. I think that's a great point about him starting that as many games as he did in college and still having all of the technical shortcomings that he does. I just think that their strategy to solving this offensive line, if you want to say that, has been really confusing. And I worry for CJ Stroud's well-being after this year.
And there was a theme as to why I was saying right as we pivoted to this segment where I was saying I think this division is wide open. I see a regression. I think the Texans will be average. I don't think they're going to be bad, but the way that they're putting the offensive line together in front of a quarterback on a rookie deal, like when I was doing mock drafts for the Texans, I almost always grabbed 2 offensive linemen, and it wouldn't have been a bad mock if you had taken 3. And they took 1. Now, granted, they also needed wide receivers, and they did draft 2, right? Because they took Higgins and they took Knoll. So they had some holes on offense. I like the additions at wide receiver, but I'm definitely not sold on the offensive line. I think when you're grabbing veterans that were in a Pro Bowl 4 years ago, okay, there's a reason that they were free agents, right? Because you don't see, my opinion is that good offensive linemen do not hit the free agency wire.
Exactly. And it's
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but it's back to the Dan Moore thing with Tennessee to bring it back to the Titans. People, you see that $82 million number on Dan Moore. Everybody, flipped their lids when you saw that number attached to Dan Moore for pretty good reason, because he's not an $82 million a year football player. But when you look at offensive tackles, good offensive tackles, like you just said, good offensive linemen in general, but especially offensive tackles, don't hit free agency. So when any, offensive linemen do, it's like good offensive tackles get paid like superstars, and starting caliber offensive linemen, like middle of the road, like Dan Moore is probably top 16 at best. And he's getting paid $82 million a year just because he's a starting caliber tackle that hit free agency. So, I mean, you have to build your offensive line through the draft. It's impossible to build it through free agency.
That's a statement that we need to repeat on a lot of podcasts. You have to build your offensive line through the draft. So one of the players that we have in common, Drew, is Bobby Hart. To throw a name out there from the past. Do you remember Bobby Hart with the Titans?
Unfortunately, I do. We had Bobby Hart, Dennis Daly, and Andre Dillard all in a 3-year span. Back then, they were all 3 competing for the worst starting NFL tackle in NFL history. It was a brutal stretch there for a minute. I think Tennessee has thoroughly learned their lesson about trying to get tackles anywhere other than the draft. Yep.
So I wonder if Owen's battery runs out, because it could be his cat. Sometimes Owen's cat takes out his computer. But we can close this out. Before we close it out, actually, Drew, do you want to let everybody know who you are and how they can find all of the different content? You're on a lot of podcasts, and I know you write for a couple of places, so let us know what you're up to.
Yeah, I'm stretched pretty thin right now across a couple different places. So everything that I'm doing will be posted and/or linked in my Twitter at Iron City Film, right down there. Twitter, X, whatever it is. I'll never get used to that. You can find it all there, linked, posted. Everything should be there. All my draft coverage, all my Titans coverage. I do all my Titans writing right now over at Titansized.com, fan side of Titan coverage team. I'm doing a breakdown series right now on each of their draft picks. All the guys we talked about today, I've done in-depth breakdown articles on all of them, or have them in the works right now. You can find me there. I will hopefully be back regularly on this podcast every week, Tuesday nights, definitely in August, hopefully sooner, possibly. We'll see where the timeline ends on that. But yeah, I'm stretched on a couple of different podcasts, but you can find everything at my Twitter or X at Iron City Film.
Oh, and you want to let everybody know how they can find all of your content.
Yeah, sorry, Wi-Fi dropped out there, so I hope my phone hotspot can stay consistent now. But yeah, you can find me here on Mondays and Wednesdays on Draft Professor. On Mondays, we're doing breakdowns of different college teams and going over kind of season previews of the prospects that are going to be on those teams, and give you even like a team preview itself, having some of the local fans or draft professors that talk about those teams or follow those teams, come on and talk about them on top of us scouting the players and talking about them that way. You can find that on Mondays. And on Wednesdays, obviously, you can see us doing scheme fits here. When this ends on Wednesdays, I will continue on Wednesdays, but instead that'll be when we start doing our weekly draft profiles of D linemen with me here, with whoever ends up coming in for Newt while he's still out coaching, and then eventually my good friend Newt will be back for our typical Wednesday slot here talking about defensive linemen. So that's what you can expect from me here on the Draft Professor. But as well, I have the YouTube channel at Weekly Huddle, as well as on Twitter at Weekly Huddle, where you can find me and some of the other draft professors putting out content that involves draft-related things or just other football-related topics. Recently on the Draft Professor, I had Newt post his top 10 offensive tackles. We had the top 10 interior offensive linemen coming up soon. Me and Bill are going to be having a 2026 mock draft drop soon. I have to finish up making the graphics for that, as well as I'm starting a series where I go through and watch the film of notable draft busts and draft steals of recent draft classes and break down on the film why we missed on them, whether as a bust or a steal, and if that was visible in the film itself or if it was something that happened post in their playing career that made that be the wrong pick in one way or another. For a teaser, the first episode I have recorded and just have to edit up now is on Jalen Reagor, and I genuinely, watching his film, having not watched it during that draft cycle, watching it now back, without ignoring hindsight, I have like a 5th round grade on him. He was not a 1st round player in that TCU offense in the slightest. I don't know what the hell the Eagles were doing there, but that's some other stuff you can look forward to catching on the Weekly Huddle YouTube channel, which we do post semi-frequently, more so now than we did before.
Yeah. So you can follow the channel at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. And the channel has daily draft content. So there are 22 people at Draft Professor, like Drew and Owen, that podcast once a week. And by everybody going once a week, it makes us all look really good, right? Because the channel just keeps going. So this week we start a Sunday podcast, and in 2 weeks we start a Saturday podcast, which means we're going to be up to 7 days a week. So what you're getting, like Owen said, Mondays and Tuesdays we're breaking down specific schools. We did Oklahoma, and I actually listened to the Oklahoma episode again today on my way into work. That actually came out really well. Like, you can just listen to it, and you're going to hear 4 people breaking down. I'm going to say it was 16 players. It may have been 12. I lost count. But if you just want to hear an assessment of 12 players in the draft, all on Oklahoma, give it a listen. One of the podcasters was an Oklahoma fan. He's also a draft professor. Ironically, a Titans fan too. Yeah. So it's a good listen, and you're going to get multiple opinions, because there were players like, somebody says I've got a day 2 grade. Somebody else says I've got a late day 3. So you will hear differing grades on players, and that's kind of what we're about here at the Draft Professor. Wednesdays and Thursdays, we've been breaking down schemes. We're about to finish that and pivot to other content. Fridays, we're breaking down quarterbacks. And like Owen said, Bill Sparks and Newt Weston have appeared on Owen's channel. I think Sam Teets has appeared on Owen's channel as well in the past. So other draft professors will be on the Weekly Huddle. Go ahead and hit a subscribe there. Drew is, I'm just going to say all over. And I mean that in a good way.
Yeah, that's accurate right now.
Yeah. So we have a group chat in the Draft Professor, and I think at least 4 or 5 people in that group chat work with Drew on other places, whether it was Stadium Rant,
I think so, yeah,
or Fantasy Trading Room and other things like there. So it's definitely Draft Professor is a community. The people are coming at us from a lot of different directions, and 22 of those 80 podcasts once a week help us put out content. You will see Drew on this channel typically on Tuesday nights with Parker. Their position specialty is offensive line, and they have the late night show. So Tuesday nights late, you can catch Drew and Parker. Owen will be here with Newt. He is Bill Sparks doing the warm-up, doing the opening act. And then Newt and Owen will be breaking down defensive linemen at night. And that will be starting on Wednesdays in October. So that being said, Owen's back. Do you want to break down the Texans' defensive scheme for us, Owen?
Sure, yeah, and then I have a last like wrap up thing with the offense, maybe as a team as a whole that I can respond to your take with at the end here, Jim. But yeah, moving into the defense, obviously not much has changed here. Their head coach is a defensive-minded head coach, and they had a strong defensive system last year, which we're expecting to come back again. They're an even front defense. You see that with two consistent edges in Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, who they're paying Danielle Hunter handsomely and will be paying Will Anderson handsomely soon, as well as having your typical 3-tech, 1-tech balance of D tackles with Tim Settle Jr. as a 3-tech and Folo Fadukasi as their 1-tech, as well as some good depth behind all four of those players. Between Derek Burnett, whatever you're going to get out of him from Philadelphia, Darrell Taylor from Chicago, Daniel Autry from the Titans, Mario Edwards, you're showing Rankins, like good defensive line depth for this front that already has really strong starters. And then when you move back to the second level, you have Azeez Al-Shaair, who I think has taken over from Montez Burfict as like most hated linebacker in the league since last season when he took a couple cheap shots, had a suspension last year. But he is a solid middle of the field linebacker, run stuffing plugger. And then Christian Harris, who's more of that weak side, movable matchup linebacker specifically. And they're able to run two linebackers because they have one of the best nickel safety hybrids. And one of my guys is one of my favorite players I've ever scouted, and Jalen Petrie out of Baylor at the nickel spot. He was like a strong safety type player at Baylor, played their star role, and he's kind of on home as that nickel back in the secondary that also has Kamari Lassiter, who was a really solid rookie last year. Derek Stingley Jr. was one of the better corners in the NFL. And then they have, in addition to CJ Gardner-Johnson, who can kind of play that similar role to Petrie. So there's going to be some flexibility between the two of them, moving back and forth and having some disguised looks there, who's in the slot, who's playing strong safety. And then Kalen Bullock, who's also a young player who had some good play in the last season. So they are a very, very good defense, built from the front to the back with talent. I think their weakest spots are at the second level, and even then, they're not that bad. And they have depth there with EJ Speed coming over from Indy, Nick Niemann from the Chargers. They have guys who have starting experience as their backups. So, and Henry To'o, whenever they do run more of a 3 linebacker look. So I think this team is stacked at all 3 levels defensively. Maybe again at second level, not super studded in the starters, but with depth. And you have a team that is going to win a lot of games off that defense alone. And their scheme is similar to like more of the modern nickel defenses, where they have guys who can play the run and still be some of the smaller DB players.
I'll definitely agree. I think that the Houston defense is stacked. I'm down on Houston because I don't think they did enough on offense. Drew, do you have anything to add on how you see the Houston defense?
No, again, I think Owen nailed it. Again, I think it's kind of the polar opposite of what we talked about at the beginning of this with Tennessee, where you have so much schematic freedom because that pass rushing unit is so elite and one of the best in the entire league. It starts at the edge, but again, like you mentioned, Owen, they have so much depth in the interior too. That it just frees up so much of what you can do when you have the talent they do in the secondary and in the front seven. When you have an edge room like they do, it frees up so much of what you can do on defense. They're going to be a really scary defensive unit, like you mentioned, at all 3 levels of the field. So yeah, I think you nailed it.
And to build on Owen's, the defense is the strength of the team. So the Texans had 11 draft picks. If I just added that up right, 2, 4, 6, 8, they had 9 draft picks. Out of the 9 draft picks, only 3 were on defense. So typically, if you have 8 draft picks and if you do 4 offense and 4 defense, it's biased to the offense. So a tie goes to the offense because generally speaking on offense, you have 6 players that play 100% of the snaps. Your 5 offensive linemen and your quarterback don't come off the field. So any draft that is equal offense and defense is actually biased to the offense. So the fact that the Texans draft was 6 offense to 3 defense tells you that they are looking to overhaul the offense. They are, like, to me, this is an overhaul draft. They might be resetting a little bit, But if there's a division you can reset in, it's the AFC South, right? Like I said, I'm not high on specifically Jacksonville and Indy with their specific quarterback situations. So this, I agree. I think the defense here looks really good. If you had to look at like Jalen Reed mixing in with those safeties, Owen, do you see a path for him to make the field this year?
It's tough because they have him specifically to be the kind of that backup strong safety role, and kind of like what I was talking about where with Petrie and Gardner Johnson, that they're very similar players. So I feel like if Gardner Johnson were to go out, they'd more likely switch Petrie back to be their strong safety and then have Miles Bryant be their starting nickel. So even in the cases of injury to one of those two guys, I do think he's going to struggle to find the field, at least this year. I do think he's a good enough player to eventually take over for that, and you could see him maybe developing into more of a free safety type. I don't think that's really his game, so maybe he's just a long-term play for when they don't want to pay C.J. Gardner-Johnson following this. I don't know how much is left on his contract. I can probably pull that up really quickly, but I'm assuming because they acquired him through trade, it's going to be whatever his existing contract was with Philly, which probably isn't in for the long haul, I should say. So I think he may be the longer-term answer for them. So I don't think you're going to see a ton of them this year, but as a long-term play, you could definitely see that being why they went out and invested there specifically. Like, they only invested 3 picks in defense. And if you're going to do that, you want them to be guys who can rotate it eventually or eventually be down the line starters. And I do think that would be something they'd be looking to do. And I just pulled up his contract here. Now there are 3 void years so he's under contract until 2026, but there's an out after this upcoming season where they can cut him and take 0 dead cap and save another $1.3 million on the cap. And then there's like 4 void years after that. So this is looking like that'll probably be a one and done with the Texans, especially with their draft investment to Jalen Reed, that maybe Gardner Johnson is not long for this team. He's here season, and it's kind of more the transitionary piece for Jalen Reed to step in and be the starter next year.
And Owen, I want to give you a shout out. So I see the Cheektowaga sweatshirt. My parents lived in Cheektowaga when I was born. So just want to give that shout out.
Cheektowaga This is a little outdated, but it's Cheektowaga Chargers now. That's the team I'm coaching for this year. So on my alma mater as well. We got the helmet in the background.
Okay, well, we are going to wrap this podcast up. For Drew, for Owen, for myself, for the 80 podcasters at Draft Professor, thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow.